Hey, I'm LioConvoy, and I'm here to tell you why you should reject truck and embrace monkey here at Iconicon 2022. Seriously though, I'm here to talk about Beast Wars and tell you how this property saved the Transformers brand in the 90s. Before I paint the foreground though, I have to go into the background. Unfortunately of note here is that there's going to be minimal editing and clips in this video. Why? Because Hasbro sucks and they are obsessive about copyright claims, and yeah, I'm not dealing with that today. So, full steam ahead. As literally anyone who is watching this should know, Transformers was a titan in 80s pop culture. It was right up there with He-Man and G.I. Joe. The show was very popular, spanning 4 seasons and a theatrical movie, and the toys were a big hit as well. These charming figures could be robots, an alternate mode, and were essentially articulated puzzles. As a cartoon, Transformers went pretty strong until the 3rd season. Some blame the drastic cast change due to the body count of the movie, or the animation studios being, well, garbage, but whatever the reason, the show was cancelled and eventually only ran in reruns. Which is sad because in writing, the 3rd season is the strongest, and I will fight any of you on that. The toys, however, persisted quite a bit longer, relying on gimmicks at that point outside of just transforming, which is why we had Target Masters and Headmasters in the 4th season. The toys themselves introduced things like Power Masters. A bit later, they had Micro Masters, Transformers at a smaller scale than usual, as well as Pretenders, Transformers with a human disguise that hid the robot inside, though the scaling was questionable. What really did the Transformers toy line end, though, was Action Masters. You know what everyone loves about Transformers? The fact that they transform. But the Action Masters decided to take well-known Transformer characters, make figures of them similar to G.I. Joe's, and instead give them separate vehicles to transform. This isn't just an implication based on a toy line either. In the comics and bio blurbs, this was absolutely confirmed that these characters are no longer able to transform at all. Brilliant move. Anyways, with no new cartoons and the comic being dead, Hasbro tried to refresh their brand in the laziest way possible, by re-airing some of the original series with some odd CGI added on, calling it Transformers Generation 2. This came out in 1993, after a nearly 2-year gap with no Transformers on the shelves. While it had a tie-in comic that actually expanded the lore of the franchise, the first toys that came out were repaints for the most part. Later in the line though, they made new molds that were pretty cool. Laser Rod Optimus Prime is the best, and I will brook no argument here. This is also where we first see Megatron as a tank. That was kinda cool. This is why the original series has retroactively been called G1, obviously. But while the toys did okay overall, it didn't do the numbers Hasbro wanted, so the franchise stagnated once again. This is when Hasbro decided a new direction needed to be taken completely if they were going to get anywhere. This is when they handed the project off to their newly acquired Kenner division. So in a way, Beast Wars is related to the vintage Star Wars line, except Beast War fans aren't giant man-children that complain about reproduction parts. Specifically, Hasbro passed it to Chris Gross, who chose to go to the opposite direction from the previous lines. Instead of blocky robots that turn into vehicles, he went in the direction of Guyver, organic machines. And so we finally enter the Beast Wars.
In the beginning came the beasts, but nature lies, they're robots in disguise. Beast Wars! Heroic new Maximals battle the evil reptile and insect forces of the Predacons. Evil Waspinator changes from insect to high-tech and puts the sting on Cheetor. But there's more to Cheetor than meets the eye. Under the skin lurks a robot within, with hidden weapons firing. All new Beast Wars, each sold separately. In the beginning came the beasts and all that creeps, crawls, and flies. But nature lies, they're robots in disguise. Beast Wars, the next step in Transformer evolution is here. New Maximals, heroic animals battle the evil reptile and insect forces of the Predacons. They fight tooth and claw. Heroic Dinobot attacks, morphs from Raptor Beast into vicious robot with spinning Velociraptor blades. Evil Waspinator full of venom changes like never before, from insect to high-tech, and puts the sting on Cheetor. But there's more to Cheetor than meets the eye. Under the skin lurks a robot within, with hidden weapons firing. But treacherous Tarantula mutates and counterattacks. Charging, slashing, blasting, all new Beast Wars. The next step in Transformer evolution is here. And when you buy the Maximo Predacon 2-pack, you get a free Beast Wars comic book. Beast Wars! Each sold separately.
The factions? Maximal and Predacon, descendant of the Autobots and Decepticons. The setting? An undetermined time in the ancient past of Earth. But this isn't the war you're used to. That's now mentioned as the Great War by these new characters. No, the show being the first Transformers cartoon to be fully CGI meant the cast needs to be small due to the expense of the then cutting-edge animation. Gone are the days of introducing new characters without any real build-up. The show opens with a pair of ships flying out of a wormhole. The Maximal ship, captained by Optimus Primal, was the only ship in the area to intercept the Predacon ship, captained by Megatron, after the Predacon stole an artifact called the Golden Disc. The problem is the Maximal ship is an exploration ship, suiting its exploration crew. So the ships crash on a foreign world. But it's not just being stranded in a different place that's the issue. That wormhole I mentioned earlier? That's due to a new technology the Cybertronians called transwarp technology, allowing them to travel through time as well as space. So they
could be any place, anytime.
But this weird world has another issue. Raw Energon. Unlike the processed version we're used to seeing in G1, this Energon is natural, raw, and way too abundant, meaning neither faction can operate in robot mode for too long. They'll need protection, so both factions take on the form of the local organic life. Where G1 characters chose vehicles in an attempt at blending in, this new breed of Transformers do it to shield themselves. Time to introduce you all to the characters. Leader of the Maximals, Optimus Primal is a calm leader who tries to rely on the strengths of his teammates while being aware of their weaknesses. His alternate form, or Beast Mode, is a gorilla.
Sometimes crazy works.
Rhinox, Primal's best friend and the big brain of the team. But don't let his brains fool you. Mess with him and you're in for some pain. Beast Mode is a rhino. Rat Trap, Team Scout and Demolition Expert. A smart aleck that has a distrust of authority and a disdain at being told what to do. But when you need a sharpshooter or someone to get behind enemy lines, there's no one better. His Beast Mode is a rat.
Oh, yes, sir. You know, I feel just heaps better knowing that our lives are in your capable hands. We're all gonna die.
Cheetor, young, brash, and regularly getting himself into trouble. This is the Bumblebee / Hot Rod of this new group. His Beast Mode is a cheetah.
What? Is it my brat?
Dinobot. Brave, noble, and with a violence-solves-all-problems attitude, Dinobot is a Predacon defector that joined the Maximals because he believed Megatron to be incompetent. He challenged Primal for leaderships of the Maximals, and lost, so takes his place as their combat specialist. His Beast Mode is a Velociraptor.
I prefer to beat my opponents the old-fashioned way. Brutally!
Now on to the Predacons. Megatron. Taking his name from the infamous Decepticon leader, this Megatron isn't quite like his predecessor. Cunning, clever, and a skill for manipulation like no other, this Megatron has plans that few others know about until it's too late. The original Megatron was a character you were concerned with when you saw him on the battlefield. This one is the one you worry about when you don't see him. His Beast Mode is a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
We must pay attention, Dinobot, otherwise, dearie me, look what happens.
Tarantulas. Twisted, vile, and a deranged scientist, Tarantulas is the most devious of all the Predacons. His Beast Mode is a tarantula.
And when your energy's gone, I feast.
Scorponok. A dim-witted second-in-command, Scorponok is Megatron's yes-man. While he's smart enough to develop his own weaponry, he's fairly easy to trick. His Beast Mode is a scorpion. Terrorsaur. Conniving, treacherous, and cowardly, Terrorsaur is the show's attempt at Starscream. I say attempt because that's kind of all he is here. His Beast Mode is a pterodactyl.
We'll overthrow these low-grade metal knockoffs you've joined, and then rule the Predacons with 2 iron fists!
Waspinator. Nervous, fidgety, loyal, and generally incompetent, Waspinator, despite the implication of his name, isn't really destructive to anything but his own well-being. His Beast Mode is a wasp. But how do you get new characters in a show like this? Well, due to the Maximal ship, the Axelon, jettisoning items called protoforms into the planet's orbit before crashing, we meet new characters as the show continues. Protoforms are basically a blank slate for new Transformers. The way this show was set up, and the limited characters, meant the writing and characterization had to go a longer way than it did with the original series. So you won't be seeing anything like The Girl Who Loved Powerglide. The people hired to write for this series was Bob Forward and Larry DiTillio, veteran writers in other brands during the 80s, but this is their first Transformers work. Due to this show needing to maintain a small cast and more focus put on long-term storytelling, this meant the cast needed the occasional upset, something you didn't see into the movie in the original show. I brought on Matt Swafford from Vintage Reclaimer Toys to give a Generation 1 fan's perspective on this, having grown up with the original cartoon and being thrusted into Beast Wars when he was nearly an adult. Let me go ahead and ask you some questions here. What are your initial thoughts when you first saw Beast Wars and how it differed from G1?
My first initial thoughts upon seeing Beast Wars when it first came out and how it compared to G1 is pace. I think the pace was, it was taking its time, and it wasn't in a frenetic hurry to show you as much as possible. I know one of the complaints with a lot of 80s cartoons was that they were just toy commercials. Beast Wars never feels like that. Beast Wars is, it's very deliberate in its pacing and its storytelling, and I think that's one of the first things that I noticed was that it had a cinematic quality to it where the story was just paramount over everything else. The substance was there over the style, even though the style was very striking, and the animation, I mean, as dated as it looks now, it was really cutting edge for the time and just kind of blew everybody away. And I think that was one of my biggest takeaways was just being really excited for that for computer animated graphics, because before that everything kind of seemed choppy and blocky. It was a very interesting style that they went with, and I'm glad they did that instead of cell animation.
What do you think of the smaller cast and its characterization compared to G1?
I also really liked the characterizations of all of the characters, both the villains and the heroes. Just right off the bat, how all of them kind of had their time to shine. It wasn't the Optimus and Megatron show, as the G1 show kind of tended to be. Everything would kind of eventually devolve into, oh, okay, well now it's up to Optimus to figure all this out, or it's up to Megatron to do this or that. It really was an ensemble, and I liked that there weren't too many characters. I think having a smaller cast really was one of the strengths of Beast Wars, because you get all of the character development. Not only that, but when there's a finite amount of team members for both factions, it kind of increased the importance of each character, because there was only, 5 Maximals and to start off with. So, I mean, if one of them perished in battle or something happened, it was a big deal. That's why when Dinobot joins the Maximals, it's a big deal. Like, he's just one character, but he adds so much to their ranks because of his abilities and what a good fighter he is. I just love how important it was. And they were always talking about how they were outnumbered by the Predacons, and really it was only by a couple of members. They weren't vastly outnumbered, but it was just enough to make a difference, I guess. With G1, I mean, there was just so many right off the bat, and so many that just didn't get their time in the sun. Sideswipe gets to loan Optimus his jetpack in the first couple of episodes, and I feel like that's the only time I can remember Sideswipe doing anything in the G1 show. And I had Sideswipe. That was my first Transformer, so it was kind of disheartening to see, like, oh, wow, my favorite character, my only Transformer that I have, just gets to loan Optimus's jetpack. Whoop-de-doo, Whereas characters like Jazz and Prowl and Ironhide, they get just a ton of screen time compared to some of the other Transformers. And the same with the Decepticons. I mean, everybody remembers Starscream and his antics and his plans and his plots and everything else. But, I mean, what about Thundercracker? Like, Thundercracker, who can say anything about Thundercracker other than he was the Blue Jet? I just remember him being kind of a dummy, and that's it. Like, that's all they get. They get their little side moments, but they don't have storylines that really revolve around them. Occasionally you would get something like Powerglide falls in love or whatever. Those were kind of like one-off situation. But Beast Wars, I feel like, was way better at the cohesion of all the characters.
Do you think that the writing had more stakes and consequences to its plots?
I think the writing on Beast Wars was fantastic, especially Bob Forward and Larry DiTillio. They always kept it linear. They kept the storyline moving. There's the occasional Transmutate comes to mind where it's a little bit kind of an outlier, but it also feeds into the overarching plot. That's a weird episode, but it's also kind of a beautiful episode in certain ways, and how it kind of mirrors the situation with Rampage. I think the stakes and the consequences were definitely higher in Beast Wars. Every plot, every plan, everything seemed to have consequence. I mean, just them being in robot form for too long had its consequences, and they would start to shut down or whatever, and they would have to transform or else go into stasis lock. I feel like just having that plot device ups the stakes by itself. Whereas with G1, I mean, if Optimus always just wanted to be Optimus and not the semi-truck, like, he could do that. That was my problem with him when I was a kid, was like, well, if you're this, badass robot, why would you ever just be like, oh, I'm just going to turn into a truck for a while? And especially in the opening, I think the two-parter or whatever, all the Autobots are flying at one point. And then they just kind of abandoned that. But yeah, I love that Beast Wars ups the stakes. It felt more grown up. Even though it was a show designed for kids, it wasn't as juvenile as G1 can often feel. I feel like it took something like the Transformers movie to really establish that there were stakes. That when I saw that movie at 8 years old, 9 years old, however old I was, and Megatron goes into the shuttle and starts blowing away Autobots, that's why that scene made kids cry, was there were no stakes really in G1. At one point they tear Optimus limb from limb and completely disassemble him, and then they put him back together at the end of the episode. So it's like there was really no mortality, and they're like, who cared at that point? And they would get shot all the time with their guns, so it was almost like, what was the point? They were these like undying automatons. So then when the movie came along and they start just wholesale killing characters, we as kids were watching that going, well, wait a minute, like, okay, this just got really real. There's no scene where they're like, oh, they're okay, they're gonna make it. No, they're gone. I mean, when Megatron blows off Ironhide's head, that's the perfect punctuation for that film, I think. And for that moment. And that's why a lot of people still don't like that movie to this day. But when Beast Wars starts killing off characters, it doesn't have quite the same effect because the stakes are higher. So, I mean, I feel like they kind of prep you for that at the very beginning.
What is your favorite thing about Beast Wars?
My favorite thing about Beast Wars would have to be the characterizations and how much weight that they give every character. And I love that they introduced the concept of having sparks or souls, and that these were living beings. Sure, they're robots, sure, they're made out of metal, but they're alive. And everything that's alive doesn't want to die. So there's that desire to continue living and doing what your purpose is. And I just love that they gave them that. Like I said before, I feel like that's why so many kids had a problem with the animated movie, because it's like, no, you're killing these characters. Part of it was, you're killing my favorite toy, but also there was a finality to that where those characters that they had grown to love, and they could get injured and torn apart and everything else, but they would always come back. And I like that in Beast Wars and the animated Transformers movie that, the good guys don't always make it. The hero doesn't always win. Sometimes stuff gets real. I love that about Beast Wars. I love the overall tone, and I love the voice acting is just really, really good. Not that the voice acting in G1 is bad, it's also very good, and the music to Beast Wars is so good too, and it kind of keeps you engaged.
Who is your favorite character in Beast Wars and why?
My favorite character in Beast Wars is definitely Dinobot. I have always liked morally gray characters, and as well as redemption stories for characters. And I love how he has this code of honor and this moral compass, but he's also kind of a pirate. He's in it for the glory and the honor and everything else, but he's inherently got good in it, even though he's very prickly and kind of sour and ill-tempered and a little reckless and bloodthirsty. bloodthirsty. And his arc in this show, as much as I hate eventually happens with him, I love every appearance that he's in this show. I love how he interacts with Cheetor. I love how he interacts with Rat Trap. Just all of it. I think he fits so well into that team, and Code of Hero is his big magnum opus, and it's one of the finest animated episodes of anything I've ever seen. I can watch it any time of the day. I mean, to me, it's just artwork from start to finish. The symbolism that's in it, he's just got so much spirit. And going back to what I said about Spark, he exhibits why I love that they gave Cybertronians sparks in this show, and that they gave them souls. When you watch a robot say, oh no, I've got to do the right thing, it doesn't mean that much. But when you see a robot say, well, I'm on this team, and now I'm on this team, but I did this thing, and I betrayed them. Now I've got to redeem myself, and got to try to do the right thing. And how he kind of finds himself, I just really love it. How ponderous he is about his actions. And his final lines in that show are, again, some of my favorite in any medium ever.
Tell my tale to those who ask. Tell it truly, the ill deeds, along with the good, and let me be judged accordingly. The rest is silence.
He doesn't want to be judged just for the good things that he's done. He wants people to know about the bad stuff too, and it's just so admirable, and it's such a cool moment. And I love how much ass he kicks. He even the baddest of the Predacons can't help but respect him for his abilities.
Why should people watch the show?
Why should people watch Beast Wars? Since it came out 25 plus years ago, I think it's gotten a bad rap. I feel like it's been unfairly judged because it was compared to G1, and it's a very different show than G1 Transformers. It was never trying to be that. And granted, I mean, they connect the dots with it, with the Golden Disc story arc, and, them finding the Ark in the mountain and all of the G1 Transformers in stasis. And that's kind of cool. It brings it around, it folds it right into G1. So I feel like that's why it's always compared to it. People that have the warm and fuzzies for G1, I mean, it's like giving somebody pizza and then giving them vegetables and being like, which one do you like better? And it's like, well, yeah, they're totally different things. You can't compare them. You've got to compare apples and apples, not pizza and broccoli. They're both good in their own ways, and Beast Wars... I don't think this is ever going to become a saying, but Beast Wars is a little too much broccoli for some people. It's too much, and it's not enough of what they wanted. When a good buddy of mine that was my roommate at the time when Beast Wars came out, we were watching it, and we were both kids that played with Transformers together. We both watched the G1 cartoon, and we had very different ideas about what Beast Wars was. He was upset that they weren't doing a show in that style, but with the G1 characters again. Or just over again, because that's what he liked and that's what he wanted. He did like a few of the characters, but I was watching it going, this is something totally different. I mean, without a couple of character names, I mean, it's almost a completely different show. If they left out the G1 connection and you change Optimus and Megatron to different names, you've got a different show. And the premise and everything is rock solid. And it's good guys versus bad guys. They're stuck on a planet. They're back in time. The fact that they're Cybertronians and that they're Transformers is kind of after the fact to me. And I feel like people should watch it and judge it on its own merits, as opposed to, oh, well, they turned Transformers into animals. That's dumb. They've turned Transformers into everything. I mean, they turned Transformers into people with the Pretenders line. That didn't make any sense. And werewolves and dragons and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of silly, It's silly to make that connection where it's like, oh, this is the jumping off point. Oh, it turns into a monkey? That just doesn't make any sense. And there's plenty about G1 that didn't make any sense. I've stopped trying to talk people into Beast Wars. Because just like it is with any fan base or fanboys out there, trying to convince them otherwise, it's almost like trying to get someone to switch religions. I always talk up Beast Wars. I always say you should give it a chance. You should watch it. The first couple of episodes are good. I feel like it really kind of figures out what it wants to be at like the episode 4 or 5-ish, I think. And it ropes you in. It gets really good, and you start caring about these characters. And when I was rewatching it, I hadn't seen season 1 in a while. And I found myself watching it and just kind of absorbing it at first, and then I got to the point where when an episode was over, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm going right into the next one because I want to see what happens next. And I feel like that's really the mark of a good show. G1 Transformers never did that for me, even as a kid. Like, you watched 22 minutes of that show, and that was enough. That was good. And then the next week, it was a totally different story, and you never knew who was going to get showcased. And I feel like that was part of the allure of that show was, ooh, I wonder if my favorite one, Brawn, is going to be the star of this episode. So yeah, Beast Wars is great. In my opinion, I think it's some of the best Transformers writing that's ever been. Out of all the different series, I know everyone has their fans. I know some people will be like, oh, that's heresy. Transformers Prime is the best. But I think Beast Wars is top of the heap as far as the actual story goes.
Despite it being a different format with new characters, new settings, and a higher level of violence and even adult content, Beast Wars proved successful. It had a complete 3 seasons, 3 spin-off series, and helped revitalize the Transformer brand. While we're only recently getting much-needed love in toy and show form for these characters that saved a brand, for many Transformer fans, Beast Wars is a personal favorite due to its unique writing, engaging characters, and its ability to commit to decisions. There's a lot to be said of the series, and I would like to talk about it more in the future. So when you see morons say stuff like this...
Apparently no one asked those disenfranchised fans because the series was nominated for and won an Emmy in 1998 for Outstanding Achievement in Animation. Big whoop. Robot Chicken has 3 of those.
Realize they have no idea what they're talking about in both storytelling and animation. In a modern media landscape that tries to reinvent and rebrand franchises to chase whatever is in the now, Beast Wars stands on the mountain as an example of how you build on a franchise without insulting or tearing down what came before. Even if you have a little fun in doing it.
Oh man, that ship wasn't built, it was poured!
Die-cast construction. It's a lost art.
I'd like to, again, thank Iconicon for allowing me to be part of this, and special thanks to my patrons as always. So what about next year? What will I cover? How about something else 90s? Oh, I know.
At last, the true hero we've been waiting for has finally been born. And his name is Gao Geiger, the King of Brave.